thank you for the invitation, and thank you all for being here. So today's talk is going to be about Eleonora's falcon. I'm going to give you an overview of the work we have done regarding research and observation for the species in Greece. So Eleonora's falcon is a diurnal migratory raptor of the Palearctic region. It was described in 1839 by Genet, and it was named after Eleonora of Arborea, which was a ruler in medieval area in Sardinia, and that was in honor of her legislative work that she did on raptors. Eleonora's falcon is considered a double endemic of the Mediterranean and of Madagascar. It is an international and European protected species. That's Eleonora of Arborea, as I was saying, the ruler after which Eleonora's falcon was named. It was given its scientific name. As I said, the two sexes are distinguishable in the field by the coloration of the eye-ring and of the shear, males having a yellow shear and eye-ring, and females having a bluish one. And the females are also larger than males. And they occur in two morphs, the dark and the light one. The light one can be distinguished by the contrasting pattern in the cheeks, in the throat, and in the belly, which is streaked, as opposed to a uniform coloration of the dark morph. So most colonies have been already discovered in the 1970s. The breeding range extends across the Canaries all the way to the Cyprus in the Eastern Mediterranean. The first global estimate was approximately 6,000 pairs, and the first systematic field studies took place in Morocco and Greece in two large colonies. And all the information that they have gathered, which was really important for setting a reference base for the breeding ecology of the species, have been published in a series of scientific publications by Dieter Christoph and Michael Vink and co-workers, but also in a nice book by Hartmut Walter. So the annual cycle of the species is actually divided in, let's say, 5 phases. Eleonora's falcon is actually well known for a unique breeding strategy because it's the latest breeder among European birds. The breeding period starts in midsummer. So upon reaching the breeding grounds, the period in between, that is the pre-breeding period, extends from, let's say, April to mid-July. Then breeding takes place from mid-July till October. Then the falcons leave their colonies and migrate south towards, let's say, Madagascar mostly. So I was saying that the falcons spent the winter, the summer in Madagascar, and then again return in springtime back to the Mediterranean. So during the pre-breeding period, while they were at the breeding grounds, they feed on insects. They catch them while in the air. They're aerial hunters. And to locate this food resource, they can visit a variety of habitats and disperse widely across the Mediterranean. So they can be observed from lowland to high mountains, from forests, cultivated areas, even rivers. They don't actually seem to have a preferred habitat for insect hunting. And up to, let's say, 2000, all the information that we had came from resightings in the field or from breeding recoveries, and that's what we knew about that time regarding the pre-breeding and distribution of the species. We will see later on how this can be improved with modern technology. So during the breeding period, the species occurs in islets, in the larger islands. It's a colonial breeder. And it occurs, as I said, in the Mediterranean, but also in Eastern Atlantic. This time of the year, the food is actually not insects, but auto-migrants. And this is the strategy I was referring to. the late breeding actually coincides with the passage of the autumn migrants with which it feeds. Insects are also supplementing their food depending on the wind patterns. It doesn't construct nests. It actually nests in crevices, under rocks or bushes, or even in open ground. The falcons become sexually mature at around the age of 2 to 3 years old. They tend to be monogamous and return to the same breeding colony or even the same nesting site, depending on their experience. And there is a role division among the two sexes. The males are the ones that provide food to the breeding mate, to their pair and the nestlings, and the female is responsible for the brooding. They usually lay 2 to 3 eggs, but four-egg clutches also occur, and they produce 1 to 2 fledglings. So also based on sightings in the field, it was already known before 2000 that the main wintering site of the species was Madagascar, and mainly the eastern part of the country. Again, during that time of the year, the species continues to consume insects, and there were various sightings across the country. Actually, Eleonora's falcons and Société falcon are the only 2 migratory raptors that occur in the country. Field studies are difficult, judging by the large extent of the country, but also the accessibility of their preferred habitat. But how do they reach their wintering ground? So the first hypothesis regarding the migratory routes the species undertakes proposed a marine flyway. That's a marine flyway across along the African coastline. But that was placed in doubt by a recovery of a falcon that was ringed in the Canary Islands in 1986 and recovered in Mali in 1989, 3 years later during spring migration. And that gave the first clue that a transequatorial voyage is involved in the process. So summarize all the knowledge that researchers had by 2000 and all the threats they had recognized by that time. They drafted an international species action plan in 1989 where they listed all the threats and all the conservation and research priorities according to the knowledge at that time. So among the top ranked threats was a disturbance at the breeding colonies resulting from human activities, but also rat predation and cat predation that resulted in reduced breeding success. By that time, persecution and illegal trade was not considered a very top-ranked threat. And also there was some vagueness in the level of threat regarding the wintering grounds, habitat loss and persecution, or other factors such as agrochemical bioaccumulation. The conservation and research priorities that were proposed were related to a stronger policy and protection of the colonies, including regulation of permitted activities, surveillance, prevention of introduction of predators, but also a more systematic assessment of the population through population census and monitoring. They also identified knowledge gaps and prioritized the identification of wintering areas, threat assessment on site and habitat protection there. But also the identification of migratory research strategies. They also raised the alarm regarding the impact of agrochemical bioaccumulation that should be further investigated, and also stressed the importance of public awareness and communication among experts. So in Greece, the species is protected by law. there is a really wide protected areas network. There are some 800 designated sites, protected sites under national laws, and 446 designated sites in the Natura 2000 network. Eleonora's falcon is actually a trigger species in almost 20% of the special areas of conservation in Greece. And over the past 20 years, there have been 5 life-funded conservation projects. That first one that set actually the reference basis for future research and conservation. That was a nationwide project, but also more local projects. And the latest one was implemented in 2014-2019. The partners in all these conservation projects are NGOs, partners for the public sector, such as universities, and also private environmental companies. So one of the most important steps in conservation and research is knowing where the falcons are and how many there are, and where is the need to protect them. So the main tool for that is the conducting of a population census. This is done through both surveys. We're actually surveying the coastline. We divide it in sectors, and we count the number of the falcons that are flying during the breeding period. So during the first conservation project, the LIFE project, almost 1,000 islands have been surveyed. That's approximately 6,000 kilometers of coastline. This indicates how intensive this labor is. And this actually gave us the opportunity to have an accurate estimate of the Greek population, which was upgraded to 13,000 pairs. The highest concentration of breeding pairs is in the northern Aegean and also in the South Aegean Sea. And around that time, similar population censuses were undertaken in other breeding colonies across Mediterranean. So the most recent global estimate for the population is approximately 32,000, 33,000 mature individuals, of which 80% occur in the Aegean Sea, which raises the importance of the country for the conservation and protection of the species. Another important tool is nest monitoring. We perform visits on the islands and site in order to record all the nests that occur, the accessible nests that occur on the islands. We record the number of eggs, the number of eggs that have hatched, and the number of fledglings per nest. This also gives us the opportunity to record any threats that occur locally, but also take some biometric measurements and samples for future research. So based on the research we have done so far, we have seen that the number of eggs that are laid per nest increase when food availability around the colony is highest, as we use this approximately normalized difference vegetation index for that. The breeding success is also higher in nests that are more sheltered by sun. And the topography of the island is an important factor for nest site presence, but also for the occupancy of an island by breeding pairs. The latter is also related to the availability, to the presence of water bodies in the vicinity of the island, but also of other breeding pairs in adjacent islands. Other line of research that has been conducted in Greece was diet analysis, and specifically spatiotemporal trends in diet composition. As you might also have guessed, the main prey is autumn migrants, passerines, but also insects. And there is, let's say, smooth transition from insect hunting to bird hunting during over the course of the breeding season. There has been also research on the brood sex ratio, how it varies among during the breeding period. So using more sophisticated technology, by that I mean camera traps, some researchers have also had the opportunity to record conspecific nest predation, but also provision of plastic to nestlings. That was the first time this behavior has been ever recorded. So, given the relatively vast geographic range of the species in the Mediterranean, and also the upgrading of the global estimate, the species is classified as least concern according to the IUCN criteria globally, but also in the country. But the population trend is not homogeneous across its range. So locally, there might be different trends, even declining trends. That was which is the case in some colonies, but also there are interannual population fluctuations. And considering the fact that it's a migratory species, it's easily understandable that it's not only threatened locally, but also from changes that occur at a global level. So I take as an example the current classification of the status of the species in North Africa, which is considered near threatened because it occurs in a really low number of islands, only 10 islets. And there have been cases where there was a swift drop of the population number in specific colonies. Regarding the threats that occur in Greek islands, one really important one is rat predation that actually accounts for a great deal of etiologies during the breeding period. So there have been rat eradication campaigns during the course of different life projects. The most extensive one was during the last life project. It involved a really large area where bait stations were laid out in a grid. They were placed across the entire surface of the islets. They were monitored regularly to record the consumption of the bait and hence to identify whether the rats were still present or not, or whether their numbers were dropping. Their activity was also recorded through camera traps. And in each case, notice boards were put to inform any visitors of the ongoing activities on the island in order not to remove the baits or not touch them. So the results were really encouraging, not only for the breeding success of the species, but also for the ecosystem of the islands in general. As you can see in the two bottom photographs, the vegetation after the rat eradication campaign in a specific island recovered almost totally within 1 year. Besides local threats, as I said, Eleonora's falcons persistence can be challenged by global environmental changes. Its breeding range actually coincides in an area that it's not only a hotspot for biodiversity, but also for climate change. The Mediterranean actually warms a lot faster than the remaining of the world. In Greece, in particular, the climate change simulations, according to the worst greenhouse gas emission, predicts a rise in mean summer temperature of even 3 degrees, and in general, a more dry environment, especially in the southern of the country, where Eleonora's falcons also breed. So another action that we have implemented is the construction of artificial nests. And this is done by natural material, either stones that are found on site and they're assembled to reconstruct a nest cavity, or from wood or metal cages. So in order to be sure that the microclimate that we artificially create for the falcons is similar to the natural nest, we have placed data loggers, temperature data loggers that also record humidity, and we have compared the conditions inside the nest, and they were pretty similar to natural nests. The falcons do occupy a nest, the artificial nest, and the breeding success is pretty similar to that of natural nests. So it's an efficient method to create to improve the breeding habitat of the species in view of the rising temperatures in the Mediterranean. And we have also seen that the occupation of artificial nests is higher in areas that are actually not very favorable in terms of geomorphology in the availability of nesting sites. Another conservation action that has taken place in the last LIFE project was the creation of a refueling oasis in an island, the Kythera Island, that's located in South Greece. And the Kythera is well known for stopover migration for spring migrants and autumn migrants. What we have done is that we purchased a land plot where we actually manage the site by cultivating, by placing cultivations and plantations. We have also secured the plot from access from goats that are free ranging on the island. And we have seen that the passerines are actually reacting to that place. The species richness is similar to other places that are favorable for staging across the island. And now we have also created an artificial pond to attract the species that rely on these resources, but also considering that the climate is going to become drier on the island, it actually provides a place where the birds can drink and bathe. So regarding water visitation patterns of Eleonora's falcons, particularly on the island, we have performed visual observations, but also camera recordings to document its visitation pattern. And we have seen that they systematically visit the water ponds throughout the period that they stay at the breeding grounds, that is from late April till late September, when the field surveys ended. They use the ponds both to drink and bathe, and they usually come in groups. There were some seasonal differences that we have observed between spring and autumn that depended on the effect of temperature, but also on the labor division between the sexes. More specifically, the males were more abundant during spring, whereas the females were more abundant during autumn. This is expected because in springtime it is the males that actually appear on the island to select nesting sites, whereas in autumn we think that the fact that we have more females than males is related to the fact that the island is also hosts also a significant breeding colony of the species. So the females that are around visit the ponds while they are breeding to bathe and drink, whereas males that are not involved in the breeding in general they can visit water ponds in other areas around the breeding colonies. So the fact that we have documented such intense visitation pattern in these water ponds is also relevant to climate change scenarios, according to which such ponds are going to become scarce in the future. And in general, such ponds are not very frequent where in the islands where Eleonora's falcons breed. They are typically dry islands, small islands. So the preservation of such water ponds might be even more crucial than we think for the conservation of the species. So a next step regarding water visitation is to document what the birds actually do. And this is the theme of a PhD student that has been studying the time activity and the budget, time budget of the species in water ponds to better understand how they actually use these water ponds. Another aspect that we have investigated in Greece is the distribution pattern of the species during both the breeding and breeding period. We have performed field studies on Adikithra Island again to document the foraging activity across the island and to relate that to the main land cover types on the island, where we have seen that they usually are more abundant over cultivated areas. Cultivated areas are actually very scarce on the island. They are not the majority of the island is covered by maki or pigana. So the preservation of cultivation activities is really important because they support food resources that are used by the species, I mean insects by that. But we have also witnessed falcons preying on birds during that period of the year. So to have an idea of the wider distribution pattern of the species, we have used sophisticated technology, telemetry. We have used different tags to this end that allow us to monitor the movements of the species across the entire globe practically. So based on the results we have so far, we know that they disperse a lot during the pre-breeding period, and even the sample that we have, the sample size is not very large. We have already witnessed site fidelity during the pre-breeding period, meaning that the birds tend to return to the same areas year after year to feed on insects. Regarding the pre-breeding period, we have monitored the ranging activity of females so far, and the majority of their movements is at a radius of 25 kilometers around the breeding colony, but this tends to increase across the breeding period as the nestlings become less dependent on the female parent to help them thermoregulate. But also the energy demands are increasing as the nestlings grow. So the female gets involved also in hunting activities and food provision for the nestlings, not only the male. We have also seen that the ranging activity is more frequent in days where the wind conditions are favorable for bird hunting. And we have also witnessed inland trips in the afternoon that are presumably related to insect hunting or even bathing or drinking. Through radar studies, co-workers have actually measured the hunting altitude of the species during the breeding period that extends between almost the sea level up to several thousand kilometers, the majority of them being between 17 and 1,750 meters above sea level. So the results from these distribution patterns are quite alarming, given the fact that Greece has become a very another hotspot, let's say, for another human activity, which is wind farm deployment. As you can see in the map, the areas that are all across the Aegean Sea, the wind potential is really high, and this is not only profitable for humans in terms of wind energy harnessing, but also for Eleonora's falcons, because this is where the autumn migration flux occurs. So there is a conflict with planned deployment of both onshore and offshore wind energy in the country. In the left picture, you can see the proposed, up to today, sorry, we don't have any offshore wind farms, but the proposed areas for wind farm deployment in the sea are actually coinciding with the location of many important breeding colonies in the country. And the same problem already exists in inland, where the investment interest is really high, as you can see in the right picture. Different colors represent different licensing stages, but you can see that they're spread all over the country and in areas that we now know Eleonora's falcons visit for during the pre-breeding and breeding period. And the issue of wind energy and versus biodiversity is quite high in Greece. We have already shown that in 2 papers that have been recently published. Actually, this kind of activity takes place in a time where nature protection is not it's not regulated. The spatial framing, the spatial planning framework for wind energy in the country is outdated. There's still ongoing research regarding the activities that are going to be allowed within the Natura network. This actually illustrates a really bad future for Eleonora's falcons. As an example of that, I would like to showcase the island of Skyros, that it's in the northern Aegean Sea. It hosts one of the largest breeding colonies in the country, and a large wind farm was planned there, constituting more than comprising more than 100 wind turbines, and it was with thanks to all the scientific evidence that we could gather by that time, either through field visits or through telemetry data or through population and monitoring activities that we have done over the years, but also with the huge support from the local community that we managed to overthrow this project. And a similar case was another huge wind farm in the Dodecanese, that's in southeastern Aegean, again comprising of some 100 wind turbines, that was declined in the end, after the strong opposition by the scientific community and from the local community, the general public. Another line of research that we have done over the years is related to toxicology. We have been preparing blood smears and blood to measure the exposure of the species to genotoxic agents and agrochemicals. There seems to be some exposure, but not on a very alarming rate. In the early 2000s, there were incidents of birds that were found dead and had elevated levels of pesticides. But this doesn't seem to be a really alarming threat for that occurs across the entire range of the species in Greece. But the work is still ongoing, and we have already seen that the level, the concentration or the frequency of abnormalities in the cytoplasm and in the nucleus of the birds also depends on the age and maybe also in the morph of the species, but we would like to gather more data to have stronger statistical support for our findings. Last but not least, regarding research at the breeding grounds, over the past few years, we have also been inspecting the birds for the presence of ectoparasites. We have already found ticks, lice, and lush flies. And we have also been collecting blood smears to analyze hemoparasites. It's an ongoing research that's quite, I think, quite promising. So moving on to the migratory period, as I said, the first indication for a transequatorial voyage was in 1919, but it was not until 2008, that this was actually confirmed through satellite telemetry. This was done by Dr. Zvenk and co-workers who had affixed tags on falcons from Sardinia. And in the two images, you can see the tracks of the adults and the juveniles, which are quite distinct, but you can also observe that they kind of converge near the equator. With the dot line, you can also see the presumed, the historical route that was first proposed in the 1950s, and how much it changes with the evidence that was gathered through satellite telemetry. Since that first project, there have been several telemetry studies almost across the entire breeding range of the species. What we have seen so far is that the birds cross the Sahara Desert over a broad front, and as I said, they converge near the equator to reach their withering routes. The return journey is not on the same flyway, it's either clockwise or anti-clockwise, depending on the destination. The birds don't actually stop to feed. They mainly have a fly and forage strategy. But before or after the crossing of the Sahara Desert, we have observed some more systematic stopover. And this is especially evident during the spring migration, where all the falcons, regardless of their breeding origin, seem to stop over in the Horn of Africa for 7 or 10 days to feed on insects before resuming their trip northwards. Based on falcons that have been monitored, that have been tracked during multiple years, there is some route repeatability, but there's also large variation. In the picture below, you can see the first falcon that was tagged with a satellite tag in Greece. That was under the guidance of Dr. Marion Zvenk. That was from a colony in central Cyclades, in central Aegean Sea. And we have been continuing this effort. We are still putting devices to gather more information on the migration of the species. And we also foster transnational cooperation. We have been providing the data to colleagues from abroad in order to gain a larger perspective on the migration strategy of raptors and on the threats that are likely along their migration routes. So again, thanks to telemetry, we have also been able to study in more detail the space use patterns during the wintering period. So the preferred habitat for the species are rainforests and cultivated areas, but this changes over the wintering period. They tend to move to denser vegetation as the wintering period progresses. By comparing the home range pattern of falcons from different breeding origin, we have seen that there is some overlap and a kind of aggregation of falcons from different breeding origin across eastern Madagascar mostly. We have also seen that they use multiple centers of activity, so they tend to move during the breeding period, but they also tend to return to the same areas year after year. By collating data from different populations, we have also been able to develop species-wide habitat model to predict the habitat stability also based on different climate change scenarios. According to this, we have been witnessing, we have predicted, southward move of the suitable habitat, which is quite alarming in the sense that nowadays the species actually occurs in mostly in the northeastern part that's not accessible to humans, but according to the climate change scenarios, the interaction with human activities is going to increase, which raises a lot of concern about the effect of human activities on the conservation of the species. And last but not least, one integral, almost equally potent part of the conservation and research we have been doing so far is public awareness and dissemination. So all the conservation projects that have been implemented so far invest a lot of resources in informing the general public through various means, leaflets, newsletters, reports, and environmental education material for students, but also we have been targeting stakeholders to provide them a more detailed overview of the current status and threats of the species to be able to preserve the species as efficiently as possible. So with that, I would like to thank you all for your attention and again for the invitation in this webinar series. Thank you.
Donc, je vais traduire en français la présentation de Christina. Alors, elle a présenté beaucoup de choses, je vais être assez bref. Donc, Christina Kassara, elle vient de Grèce. Et là, elle a présenté le travail de 20 ans de recherche sur la conservation du faucon d'Éléonore, principalement en Grèce. Donc, le faucon d'Éléonore, c'est une espèce de faucon assez particulière parce qu'elle a deux morphes. Bon, déjà, une morphe, on peut distinguer mâle et femelle, mais surtout, là, une morphe brune et une morphe pâle. Il est très joli. Et il niche en colonie dans des cavités, dans des falaises, des espaces rocheux sur des îles, principalement des îles distribuées entre les Canaries, au large de la côte atlantique de l'Afrique, et surtout en Méditerranée. Il a un régime alimentaire un peu particulier parce qu'avant la période de nidification, il se nourrit d'insectes principalement. Et en fait, il niche assez tard dans la saison, plutôt à la fin de l'été européen, parce que sa nidification coïncide avec le retour des oiseaux migrateurs, la migration automnale, donc le retour de l'Europe à l'Afrique, où là, les faucons vont se nourrir principalement justement de ces oiseaux migrateurs qu'ils vont chasser activement pendant leur migration. Donc, après la nidification, ils migrent, principalement à Madagascar, et pour ça, ils traversent tout le continent africain, et on voit que elle a montré que toutes les différentes populations, elles se rejoignent, en fait, elles convergent à peu près au niveau de l'équateur, et après, elles bifurquent direction Madagascar. Et à Madagascar, leur étude a aussi montré qu'ils se nourrissaient à nouveau d'insectes. Ensuite, elle a un peu parlé d'un plan d'action international pour sa protection qu'ils ont développé. grâce à ce plan d'action, ils ont pu identifier les différentes menaces et les mesures de conservation et la recherche qui étaient nécessaires pour les mettre en place. Donc là, elle a présenté après toute une liste d'actions et de recherches qu'ils ont menées. D'abord, elle a présenté les recensements qu'ils font en Grèce. Donc les recensements, ils le font le long des côtes en bateau. Ils parcourent jusqu'à 6200 km de côte pour les recenser et estimer la population. Ils ont estimé jusqu'à 30 000 individus matures. Et 80% de la population globale de faucons d'Éléonore se trouve dans la mer Égée, donc la mer entre la Grèce et la Turquie. Ils ont aussi recensé les nids et vérifié qu'est-ce qui pouvait influencer le succès de reproduction. Donc, il y a un plus haut succès de reproduction quand il y a plus de nourriture, aussi différents autres paramètres. Ils ont mis des pièges photos, ils ont documenté quelques autres aspects, comme des fois des prédations de nids par des congénères de la même espèce, ou des problèmes liés au plastique. Le faucon d'Éléonore, c'est une espèce non menacée à l'échelle globale, mais certaines de ces populations sont menacées, par exemple les populations de faucons d'Éléonore en Algérie. Elle a après listé de quelques problèmes. Par exemple, sur certaines îles, il y a des problèmes liés aux rats. Donc, il y a eu des programmes d'éradication des rats qui ont été un succès. Ça a très vite marché. Sur d'autres îles, ils ont aussi posé des nids artificiels. C'était des sortes de nids en bois qui étaient intégrés dans la pierre pour imiter les cavités naturelles. Et ils ont mesuré les conditions. Ces nids artificiels donnent un peu des conditions similaires aux cavités naturelles. Et le succès reproducteur dans ces nids artificiels est aussi similaire. Donc, c'est une bonne stratégie. Ils ont aussi fait des mesures de l'amélioration de l'habitat, notamment pour les oiseaux migrateurs. Comme ça, ils se stoppent plus sur ces îles. Et comme c'est la nourriture de ces faucons, c'est avantageux. Ils ont aussi étudié la visitation fréquente de ces faucons sur des points d'eau. D'ailleurs, ils ont créé des points d'eau artificiels parce que les faucons ils vont régulièrement visiter ces sites pour boire et se baigner. Et probablement, le réchauffement climatique va rendre ces points d'eau plus rares, ce qui pourrait avoir un impact sur le faucon d'Éléonore. Elle a aussi un peu montré des études sur la distribution du mouvement, sur la distribution spatiale. On peut voir qu'il y a une très forte fidélité au site de reproduction. Après, elle a parlé des problèmes liés aux nouvelles infrastructures d'énergie durable, comme les éoliennes. Il y a de plus en plus de projets éoliens dans la mer et sur Terre, un peu partout en Europe, mais aussi en Grèce. Et ça pose de nouveaux conflits avec le faucon. Et avec l'aide de communautés locales sur certaines îles, ils ont réussi à faire opposition à certains de ces projets éoliens. Donc, c'était un peu une victoire parce que potentiellement, ça aurait été une menace pour le faucon. Ensuite, elle a montré des études plus préliminaires sur l'exposition à des produits phytosanitaires. Elle a parlé d'effets qui peuvent dépendre de l'âge, de la phénologie ou même de la morphe des faucons. Mais les données sont préliminaires, donc il faut plus de données avant de publier ces résultats. Pareil avec des infections par des ectoparasites. Et ensuite, enfin, elle est revenue en Afrique. Elle a parlé de la migration du faucon entre la Grèce et Madagascar. Je ne vais pas revenir là-dessus. Après, là, ils ont aussi, à Madagascar, étudié l'utilisation de l'habitat et la distribution des faucons d'Éléonore. Donc, il y a une très forte fidélité à leur site de non-reproduction. Et ils ont même modélisé avec des scénarios de changement climatique. Ils ont vu que la distribution à Madagascar va changer au futur. Et potentiellement, il y aura peut-être plus de conflits parce que les zones propices seront plus des zones plus habitées, donc il y aura peut-être plus de conflits avec les humains. Et après, elle a un peu montré plein de communications qu'ils font. Et c'est déjà la fin de ma traduction. J'ai déjà fait 5 minutes, je pense.